Courtroom number 2 in Southfield County smelled of damp paper and decaying power. Fluorescent light from above fell harshly on gray tile floors, casting a cold glow over pale, tense, or indifferent faces. At the center, upon a dull polished wooden bench, Judge Rita Vaughn had just entered. Her heavy robe exaggerated her slow, mechanical gait. Eyes down, gavel tapping lazily, like yet another hearing wasn't worth the flicker of attention. At the defense table sat a black woman in silence. She wore a navy blue dress with long sleeves, sitting with the posture of someone trained in a lecture hall more than a courtroom. Round glasses, neatly tied hair, chin slightly lifted, eyes focused nowhere. Clarice Monroe, age 45, no record, no expression. The metal cuffs remained on her wrists, even though she hadn't resisted at all. Beside her was the court-appointed attorney, Ava Lynn, an Asian-American woman around 28, young, tense. She had never handled a case like this. She had tried to talk to Clarice before the hearing, but all she got in return was polite silence, like a professor silently watching a student butcher a presentation. Case number 274B, the clerk called out. Defendant Clarice Monroe, charges disorderly conduct, obstruction of a peace officer. Clarice didn't flinch. No deep breath, no bowed head. As if she'd heard far worse and knew this was just the surface. Ava rose, voice a bit shaky. Your Honor, my client was arrested Wednesday morning on the grounds of Jefferson Elementary School while intervening to stop a police officer from using excessive force on a 6th grade student. According to the video we have, my client did not assault anyone. Video has not been authenticated, Judge Vaughn interrupted flatly. It's inadmissible, Ava faltered, across the courtroom. Officer Brent Kessler, muscular, broad-shouldered, close-cropped hair, sat with arms folded, one leg over the other, wearing a smug grin. Kessler stood. His voice was clipped and firm. Your Honor, the defendant interfered in the restraint of a violent student. When I ordered her to step back, she kept advancing and verbally insulted me in front of students. I was forced to neutralize the situation. Neutralized by arresting an unarmed, non-violent woman. Ava tried to hold her composure. She was non-compliant. Kessler shrugged. I acted within protocol. Clarice didn't look at him. Not even a glance. She sat like stone. Only those paying close attention would notice her back never touched the chair. Kessler stepped forward, crossing the threshold of the witness area, as if to clarify further. His eyes scanned her face, irritated like her calm silence was an unbearable itch he couldn't scratch. That attitude, he growled, shows no remorse whatsoever. Clarice said nothing. Then, without warning, he slapped her. The back of his hand cracked across her face. Her glasses flew to the floor. A split opened on her lip. Gasps tore through the room. Ava screamed. The clerk froze in shock. But Judge Vaughn didn't move. Clarice calmly bent down, picked up her glasses, wiped a streak of blood from her lip. No shaking, no whimper, no tear. Just a plus-sized black woman, struck in open court, and her only response was fixing her glasses. Then, slowly, she turned to face Kessler. Her eyes, neither angry nor wounded, looked at him like someone reading out a sentence already drafted. And she said, voice low, steady, not a syllable wasted, you just signed your resignation letter with that slap. The room held its breath. Not because the line was explosive, but because it was final. Like a formal memo already filed. No shouting, no threat. Kessler stepped back, something in his chest misfiring. Judge Vaughn finally looked up for the first time in minutes, but said nothing. Perhaps she didn't know what to say. Ava sat frozen, eyes tilted toward Clarice like she was seeing an entirely different layer beneath that calm exterior. And somewhere in the far back row, where the light didn't reach, A chair was quietly pulled out. No one noticed yet. No one realized Clarice had never been here alone. They would soon learn, and no one in that courtroom would ever forget it. Clarice sat in the defendant's waiting room like she was waiting for a lecture to begin. The bruise from the slap was beginning to show a purple line spreading across her left cheekbone. The blood had dried. She hadn't asked for a bandage. She hadn't checked the time. She simply sat straight, hands gently resting on her lap, eyes fixed on a spot exactly 10 paces away. Ava Lynn sat across from her, hands still trembling slightly as she opened her notebook. She had watched her client get slapped in open court, and the room had stayed silent. No one stepped in, not the judge, not the clerk. What shook Ava more than the slap was Clarice's response to it. No cry of pain, no outrage, just a single, declarative sentence confirming the consequence. Ava tried again, voice soft. "Ms. Monroe, I know you don't want to talk much, but I need to ask, do you want to file a complaint against Officer Kessler for assault?" Clarice turned toward her, eyes sharp, as if Ava were a third-year student, asking a basic legal question she should have already known. "No rush," Clarice said calmly. "When a bully strikes in front of a crowd, he doesn't just break the law. He opens a door I don't even have to kick." Ava opened her mouth to respond, but stopped. Clarice's calm didn't feel like resignation. It felt like waiting. Her eyes drifted down to Clarice's wrist. The watch there wasn't standard. Matte black strap, a blank face with only 3 subtle symbols. On its side, a recessed button designed not to be pressed by accident. Clarice tapped it twice. Light, precise. 30 miles away, inside a wooden cabin nestled deep within the Okefenokee National Forest, a soft beep echoed from a metal case mounted in the wall. Inside was a secured comms unit, a high-clearance channel reserved for top-level FBI personnel. Gabriel Monroe sat motionless with an untouched cup of coffee. His laptop sat open, but no one was using it. He was reading an internal intelligence memo when the signal blinked to pulse priority alert. No words, no details, none needed. He stood, retrieved his encrypted phone, and inserted a secure SIM card. Then he reached for his charcoal gray suit jacket, slid a slim folder into the inner pocket, locked the cabin door, and left. His face was stone, not angry, not anxious, just certain it was time. The hearing resumed at 10:45 am. Clarice was led back to the defendant's chair, a small bandage now covering her left cheek. Kessler had returned to his seat, still smug. He lounged back, leg crossed, chuckling with a rookie officer posted at the door. Ava stood, holding up a USB drive. "Your Honor, we have a security camera recording from Jefferson Elementary School. In it, my client Clarice Monroe does not assault anyone. She steps between Officer Kessler and a female student. She says, 'Don't drag her like an animal.' At no point does she physically touch any officer." Judge Vaughn raised an eyebrow. "Has this video been authenticated by law enforcement?" Ava hesitated. "No, but it was pulled directly from the school's official surveillance system. The timestamp is clear. Not admissible." Vaughn cut in coldly. "This court does not accept evidence without third-party verification. We proceed." Clarice sat still. She had expected this. And she knew, now, that words would change nothing. She glanced at her watch. The courtroom's rear door creaked open. A black man in a gray suit stepped in, carrying a small leather case. No one noticed him until he was already seated in the last row, still and silent, as if he'd been there all along. Ava noticed him first. The sharp eyes, the upright posture, that steady calm she'd only ever seen in federal courtrooms back in D.C. Something about him wasn't threatening, but commanding. She leaned toward Clarice and whispered, "Ms. Monroe." "Who's that sitting in the back?" Clarice didn't turn, didn't smile. "The only person in this room." she said evenly. Who doesn't need permission to give an order? Ava froze. Clarice inhaled softly. Then, still facing forward, she added, "And he's not here because I need rescuing. He's here to remind them that law doesn't only belong to those who carry guns." A shiver ran down Ava's spine. She didn't know why, but something had shifted. Since the man sat down, the room felt different. It was no longer just a hearing, no longer a playground for a cop with unchecked power or a tired judge. It had become a weighted balance, one side suddenly heavier than the other, and anyone who had assumed Clarice Monroe walked into this alone had just made a catastrophic miscalculation, not just of the woman, but of the entire game. 12 minutes. That's all it had been since the man in the gray suit walked in and took his seat in the last row. Less than 12 minutes, and yet the atmosphere in courtroom number 2 had shifted entirely. Not because of anything he did, but because of everything he didn't. He just sat there calm, still, unreadable, no name tag, no badge. No one in the courtroom called him by name. No one introduced him. And that was exactly what made the tension stretch tighter than wire. Clarice never turned around. She didn't need to. But Ava Lynn, sitting up front, couldn't help glancing back now and then, drawn by a growing certainty. That man wasn't there to observe a trial. He was there to witness who would dare cross his wife. Officer Brent Kessler hadn't figured it out yet. He squinted, leaned toward a colleague, and muttered, "Who's that guy in the back?" The other cop shrugged. "No idea. Looks." Federal Kessler smirked. "Feds always love a little drama." Ava stood again to continue her argument. Her voice was firmer now, clearer. The presence behind her didn't press on her shoulders. It lifted them. Clarice didn't need protection. She needed to be heard. "Your Honor," Ava said, "I request a continuance to allow proper verification of the Jefferson Elementary surveillance footage. If the court won't admit it now, my client still deserves the chance to prove she acted lawfully." Judge Vaughn peered over her glasses. "Motion denied. This court will proceed. We must respect the time of our law enforcement personnel." Kessler chuckled under his breath. Clarice calmly removed her glasses and wiped them with a silk cloth from her pocket. The quiet precision of it made Kessler visibly agitated. "What do you think you're doing?" he barked, trying to stall. "You think someone's here to save you." Clarice slid her glasses back on, eyes fixed on the judge. Kessler slammed his hand on the table. "I've said it already. She resisted a lawful command. She disrupted the scene. I saw it. I was the officer in charge." Clarice turned her head. For the first time during the entire trial, she looked him in the eye. "Authority?" she asked, voice calm, like a teacher correcting a student's definition, or a delusion of power. "What did you just say?" Kessler scowled. Clarice stood up. No request, no permission. The entire courtroom froze. "Your Honor," she said, never looking away from Kessler, "I would like to speak not as a defendant, but as someone who once stood on the other side of this courtroom." Judge Vaughn tilted her head. "Meaning, before I moved into education, I served 6 years as a civil rights attorney in the federal court system," Clarice said evenly. "I advised oversight committees on misconduct investigations in 3 states. I know how to ask questions. And I know when someone should never have been issued a badge." Kessler scoffed. "What are you now?" "A lecturer, telling war stories in retirement." Clarice didn't answer him. She turned to Vaughn. "And in 2017, I sat on a legal advisory board where you," Judge Vaughn, "declined to sign post-conviction reintegration benefits for wrongly arrested mothers from the Martin Luther housing raid." Vaughn's brows knitted. "That's unfounded." "It's not," Clarice interrupted. "Eyes steady. I have your handwritten signature on record." I remember your nod as you denied that motion. I remember the way you looked at the small black woman sitting at this very table 7 years ago. That woman was me. The courtroom fell silent. Ava stared at Clarice, another layer of her peeled back. Not with emotion, but precision. You stood here before Clarice nodded, as counsel, not the accused. Then came the sound of a chair scraping back. The man in the back stood up. Slowly. No one asked. No one announced. But the entire courtroom turned. He walked to the center aisle, his steps sounding like the ticking of a long overdue clock. Gray suit. Mahogany briefcase. No badge. Kessler stopped breathing for a second. The man came to a halt and said quietly, clearly, needing no volume, "My name is Gabriel Monroe, Deputy Director of the FBI, responsible for oversight and internal investigations of misconduct in local law enforcement agencies." Time stopped. Ava's jaw dropped. Judge Vaughn went pale. And Kessler had nothing left to grin with. Gabriel continued, eyes scanning no one, commanding everyone, "I am here today, in a personal capacity, to witness a man lay hands on my wife, in front of cameras, in front of witnesses, and within a system that should have protected her." Clarice remained standing. She didn't turn toward him. She didn't have to. Gabriel nodded once. "Thank you for waiting," he said. Clarice gave a small nod back. And for the first time that day, her gaze softened. Not because she had been rescued, but because the moment for action had finally come. Courtroom number 2 was no longer a courtroom. It had become a federal investigation. And those who once thought Clarice Monroe stood alone were about to learn how wrong they were. Not just about the woman, but about the entire system they thought they controlled. The news spread faster than a summons. By noon that day, every regional outlet had broken the story. Officer Brent Kessler arrested in courtroom for assaulting defendant. Wife of FBI Deputy Director, Southfield Courthouse. Under federal probe for systemic racial bias. Law professor Clarice Monroe, from victim to game changer. Cameras swarmed the courthouse. Microphones stretched in every direction. Questions flew like arrows. But Clarice Monroe didn't speak, didn't answer, didn't cry. She stood beside her husband like a woman who had never once believed that room had the power to break her. In a short video clip that went viral, shared over 2 million times in 4 hours, Clarice was seen walking down the courthouse steps, handbag in hand, eyes straight ahead. A young reporter called out, "Ms. Monroe, do you have anything to say to the women of color who've stayed silent for so long?" Clarice paused. She didn't turn around. She just spoke low and firm. "I'm not here to demand justice. I'm here to remind them it was never a privilege, and our silence has never meant consent." 3 days later, Clarice returned to her classroom, University of Georgia. Lecture Hall 9, packed. Not just with students, alumni, colleagues, journalists posing as late learners of the law. The opening slide held no image, no title, just a white sentence on black. "The law is a dull blade. It can wound or it can heal depending on who holds it." Clarice walked in from stage right. No makeup, no speech notes. She stood there, steady as ever, and looked out over the class. Last week, I was slapped in a courtroom, and in that first second afterward, everyone looked at me like I was humiliated. But if you've lived with the law long enough, you know that sometimes the one who gets hit isn't the victim. They're the signal. The room held its breath, a courtroom waiting for a verdict. Clarice nodded gently and continued. "The truth is, they didn't hit me because I was wrong. They hit me because they couldn't stand that I wasn't afraid. And when you know your rights, really know them, you don't have to scream. You just look back." And count to 3. Brent Kessler was officially charged with 3 counts: assaulting an unarmed civilian during a legal proceeding, perjury before a judicial officer, violating federal civil rights protections. Judge Vaughn filed for early retirement. In her resignation letter, she wrote, "I didn't listen. And sometimes, silence is the loudest evidence of guilt." Clarice received an invitation from the National Civil Justice Commission. "We're seeking professors who can turn an assault into a national lesson." She didn't respond right away. She didn't need validation. That day, she was sitting in a small park near campus, reading an old book on constitutional law. Two young female students approached, nervous. One finally spoke, "Ms. Clarice, I used to think I had to shrink myself to stay safe. But after last week, I just want to grow big enough that no one ever thinks they can hit me and walk away." Clarice looked at them and smiled slowly. "You don't have to grow bigger," she said. "You just have to stand where you are and never step back." Clarice Monroe was named the keynote speaker at the national conference, Law and Power in Biased Systems. The title of her speech, "I Wasn't Sitting Alone. I Was Sitting Where Justice Forgot to Show Up." And people still talk about the day she was slapped. Not because of the slap itself, but because of what she made of it. A full stop to the illusion that women like her could be publicly humiliated, without consequence. Clarice never shouted, never struck back, never threatened. She simply stood, as steady as the law should be, and let the truth speak, right on time.